Shana Tova, everyone. I want to jump ahead a little bit in time to next week, to Yom Kippur, when in our Musaf service, in the Avodah service, late in the afternoon, we will be going back in time to the 1st century CE. And we will join Rabbi Yishmael HaKohen, and with him, we will enter the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh HaKodeshim, that stood in the ancient temple, and before the temple, in the tabernacle. So what was in the Holy of Holies? The Ark, lined with gold inside and out, and on it was a cover that was made of one solid piece of gold. And formed from that piece of gold on the cover were two figures, known as Cherubim. It's the Hebrew for cherubs, right? Cherub, the Cherubim. No one is 100% sure what exactly these Cherubim looked like, but the rabbinic tradition often describes them as figures that had wings like angels, that outspread covering the ark, and human faces. So why am I talking about this? Like, what relevance does this have to us now? We haven't had a temple in nearly 2,000 years. So the point of the temple, and before it the tabernacle, was that it was supposed to be a place where God would dwell among us. There's the famous verse in the construction of the tabernacle where God commands it, V'shachanti betocham, so that I will dwell among them. And very famously, the commentary says, many of us know this, right? It's not in the building. It's not that I dwell in the tabernacle. I dwell among the people, God says. So, the structure and the operation of these edifices have something to say to us about what human behaviors and character traits and ways of being are compatible, so to speak, with God's presence, and what, in a manner of speaking, drives God away. In non-theological terms, what's conducive to human thriving and flourishing and blessing and peace and goodness? All the things we prayed for, B'Sefer Chaim, inscribe us in the book of all these good things, right? And what leads to human suffering and violence and evil? What supports life and what yields death? That's what it was about. And the image of these cherubim, these figures, offer particularly rich insights into these questions. We learn, for example, in the book of Numbers, the Torah specifies that in the tabernacle, God's voice would emerge and speak to Moses from the space between these two figures precisely. Right? God is discernible between the two faces. That teaches us a lot. Right? It's in the interactions between human beings, in the realm of ethics and love and connection, that we sense God. And it's between the two, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we can never encounter God alone, but the primary experience of God, according to this vision, is in relationship among us and in the interstices between us. We echo this idea by the requirement that when you learn Torah, you're supposed to study with someone else. It's called a chavruta. You're not supposed to study Torah alone, right? You can't hear God's voice as well alone as you can between two. And it's a conceptual reminder, right? It's a little bit of a protection against spiritual arrogance and narcissism and self-worship. It highlights our duties to one another as the very foundation of religion. More on that on Wednesday. Now, in addition to the Torah itself, there's a brief little text, part of a longer discussion in the Talmud about the cherubim that opens a whole world of meaning. The rabbis of the Talmud posed a question, a difficulty, a kashya, a problem. How were the cherubim positioned? The question comes because there are two conflicting verses. Exodus says they faced each other like this. And then there's a verse in 2 Chronicles that said they faced toward the house, the walls of the, like outward, like that. So which is it? We have two verses that conflict. The rabbis conclude both. Okay, how is that possible? Here's the text. How were they standing? Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. One says their faces one toward the other, and one says their faces toward the house. Oh, kashya, this is not difficult. This is not a problem. Here, when the people are doing the will of God. Here, when the people are not doing the will of God. In other words, these figures turned. Now, one way of understanding this is that the cherubim respond to our behavior, right? As a consequence of what we do, they move. And thus they enable God's voice to emerge or not. I want to read it differently. I want to read it that the cherubim actually mirror us. They symbolize us, they represent us, and they reflect ourselves back to each other, ourselves. So when we turn toward each other, they face each other. When we turn away, they turn away. Now that's a way of saying, what does it look like when human beings are doing God's will? It looks like this. We're facing each other, face to face. If we're not facing each other, if we are turning away from each other, or we are turning against each other, then by definition, we are not doing, quote, God's will. We are not behaving in life-sustaining ways. And we will drive good and blessing from our world. So I hope by now it's obvious why this text has been rattling around in my brain for this year, and why I've chosen it as our starting point on these holy days. The first reason is very obvious. There is so much turning against each other in our world. The polarization, the hate, the scapegoating, the violence. And we are doing a lot of turning away from each other, from writing each other off and dismissing each other, to all of the things that we are refusing to see. The second reason is that these are really dehumanizing times, and we're all at risk. And I believe that our willingness and ability to be face to face goes to the heart of our individual and collective humanity, to our ability to hold the humanity of the other and our own humanity. The third reason is that it speaks to a crisis of religion that is happening in our day. I mentioned that God's voice emerged from between the faces of these figures. That could only happen when they faced each other. The face-to-face encounter is the primary way that God manifests in this world, and conversely, one cannot turn away from fellow human beings or encourage others to do so and still remain connected to God. But look at all the religious figures in our world and lots of lay people purporting to act in God's name who are doing exactly that, sowing hatred and division and dehumanizing people and scapegoating them. By definition, that's screwed up. Something is deeply amiss, or they are just lying about the God part. And this is a struggle across religious traditions now. My Christian colleagues are deeply distressed by the way that Christian nationalism is sowing hatred and division. We should all be distressed and worried about that. Radical Islam obviously has this problem, and we Jews have it too. The last reason that this text feels right for me this year is that our central task on the high holidays is teshuvah, right? And that word can translate in a whole bunch of different ways. It can mean repentance, it can mean response, it can mean returning, and one meaning of it is turning. And it raises for us the fundamental question, not only on these high holy days and in the process of teshuvah, but really the fundamental question of life. What direction are we facing? What are we facing toward and away from, and whom? And what direction should we be facing? Toward what and toward whom? So here's a little preview of what we're going to be encountering over the next 2 days and then on Yom Kippur. We'll be dealing with this image of the Cherubim facing each other or turning away. Some other biblical texts as well, mostly Yom Kippur, Moses and God face to face, panim el panim. Israel and God face to face, panim befanim, which is different. Face within face, we'll talk about that tomorrow. Jacob fearing to see Esau's face and ultimately seeing in it the face of God. The concept of Hester Panim, God's hiding of God's face, and Moses' hiding of his own face. One of our guides on the journey will be Emmanuel Levinas, especially tomorrow and Wednesday. Who is Levinas? Levinas was a 20th century French philosopher of Lithuanian Jewish ancestry. He died in 1995. I gave you some quotes of his on the green sheet because I know that people like to follow sometimes when I quote text, so you have them. I will say up front, Levinas is really, really hard. I don't know that I totally understand him accurately, and he's very hard to read. What you will be getting, I can vouch for, is Jan influenced by Levinas. I can't totally promise you're actually getting Levinas, right? So read at your own risk. Don't worry about it if it doesn't. We'll unpack it together. I promise it will be comprehensible. He's hard. But we can't look at the face without dealing with him because he is famous for his work on the significance of the human face. Probably the most famous Jewish thinker ever on what it means to look at a face. In brief, he talks about the face as representing the infinity of each individual, the primary way we experience God, as we've talked about, and, as we'll get to on Wednesday, the source of responsibility toward and for the other, the root of ethics. Another of our guides will be Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg. He published a new book last year, The Triumph of Life, and in it he identifies 3 fundamental dignities that every human being possesses, inherent in our being made in the image of God. We'll talk about them tomorrow, but here they are. The dignity of infinite value, the dignity of equality, and the dignity of uniqueness. All of us inherently are possessed of those 3 things. Along the way, we're going to ask a lot of questions. What does it mean to be face to face? Why is something so simple like that so hard? What do we have the courage to face around us and within us? And what do we hide our faces from and why? What makes us turn away? And what's the cost of doing that? What face do we reveal to others and conceal? Underlying it all will be the key question, what do we need to turn toward right now? I don't have to tell you that we are in the midst of very serious ethical, moral crises, spiritual crises. And our most urgent task is to recover and shore up our ethical center, our moral sensibility, our very humanity, all of which are being assaulted daily and all of which we are at the risk of losing. We need to shore that up and then act from it. And I've chosen this theme because there is no question in my mind that in this moment, the direction we need to turn is toward each other. Doing so is big and challenging, complex societal work. And it can be really hard emotionally. And also, it is the simplest, most straightforward thing that all of us and any of us can do. I had a conversation with a friend the other night, my friend Tony. And he said to me that the problems that we face are so huge and overwhelming and complicated, and we keep looking for big, comprehensive answers. And then we feel helpless because we don't have them. And even if we did have them, most of us aren't in a position to implement them. But he said, it's really very simple. In his words, be kind. Be kind. Frankly, I'm good with that. It's a good story. In my frame, I would say more generally, turn toward. And we talked about that. Create what you want to see in your own little corner of the world. If enough people plant seeds, he said to me, you have a forest. So although turning toward each other is not nearly as easy as it sounds, and we will certainly go to some complicated and challenging places. I know, we've met before, right? We're going to do that. I actually really want to begin these High Holy Days with the most straightforward, pshat, simple, personal meaning of this text. So simple and so powerful. And through all the complications, I hope we hold it to the end. Turn toward each other. That's what the text is saying. Turn toward each other. That will bring goodness into the world. Just that. One last point. Note the brilliance of the rabbis in that brief little text about the Cherubim. It's kind of meta. They went in two ways. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. One says, the other says. Each one is right. Each is accurately describing reality, just at two different times, in two different contexts, in two different human situations. It models the message they're conveying. We have a fuller, more accurate picture when we listen to each other, when we turn toward each other, when we learn from each other. It doesn't mean that everyone is right all the time. There are actually really, really bad ideas. Bad ideas because they're not good for us, and bad ideas in the sense of evil. Like bad ideas, that's true. But what it's saying is that no one has a lock on the truth. And sometimes we think we're totally right, and it could be true that someone else is also totally right in a different context, in a different situation. And the second thing, note the way they've taken these sculptures that are carved in metal, fixed, and they've animated them. So they're no longer static, frozen, stiff-necked, but dynamic, flexible, able to turn. That's the hopefulness of these days and the hopefulness of Teshuvah. Nothing about our world is carved in stone or metal. Not the polarization, not the enmity, not the apathy, not the direction we are heading. We always have the ability to turn.